Welcome back. Google's search results for domestic violence related inquiries will now display contact information for the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Joining me to discuss the upgrade to the search engine and domestic violence is Program Manager for VIP Mujeres, Yainel Peña-Furment. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Kibin, for having us on.
Now, can you tell us about your organization?
Sure. We started in the early 1980s, specifically in 1984, and we started up as a grassroots program in East Harlem, addressing the domestic violence within the Latino community. Currently, we provide services such as domestic violence counseling for adults, children, and and adolescents. We also provide sexual violence counseling. We have our hotline that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we have transitional housing, emergency shelter, a rapid rehousing program also that we just recently launched, as well as economic justice programs to serve the DV surviving community.
So I'm very shocked that this is actually a new development for an organization like Google. What were your initial thoughts when you saw that this would be an addition to the search engine?
So I think it's important for us to have the ability to search immediately online and come up with a domestic violence communication base, because sometimes it's really important for clients to just be able to quickly access help, right? It may not be that they have the time to dial the number, rather just search real quick, like DV hotline, and right away the number would come up and be connected immediately. So it's a really good uh, option to have technologically.
Now, although it is a step in the right direction, and I do agree with you, it is like definitely in addition to things that we have. Do you feel the lateness of such an upgrade effect reflects on how society views domestic violence?
Unfortunately, yes. Domestic violence is still somewhat on like the back burner of society's problems and issues that continue to happen. And that's why we have agencies like ours to try to eradicate what it is, domestic violence within the communities.
Now, according to New York City stats, the Bronx sees the highest number of domestic violence complaints, specifically for 2020. In your experience, have you noticed a link to poverty and domestic violence?
Yes. So the same way poverty is linked to a lack of like resource, it's very similar to the lack of knowledge that there are resources like domestic violence agencies that provide services and assistance to the community.
Now, law enforcement unfortunately has a reputation of failing domestic violence victims. What would you like to see change when it comes to support of victims? And what can law enforcement specifically do much better to support these victims?
Overall, I think trainings amongst the law enforcement and also the DV surviving um, providing, sorry, agencies. So kind of like offering some type of space where we're all working together, trying to get rid of the domestic violence as a community, right? Working together and being able to eradicate again the domestic violence as a whole through trainings and education, which is the only way that we would be able to get rid of DV.
Now, so we all view different forms of media, and I can remember several times, even in my childhood, even as a teen, where an issue of domestic violence wasn't taken seriously, and like you'll see it in movies or comedians, like people make jokes and laugh about it, and then I don't think it's until you get older you see how harmful that is as a society that we contribute to that. How do you think we should aim to become better allies to victims of domestic violence?
As I had mentioned before, education, knowledge. It's the only way we would be able to empower one another, and eradicating the domestic violence. Networking, with one another. And again, I think that education is really like the tool that we all need so that we can get rid of the domestic violence. So
And
educating our families or children, right, around DV.
And I was gonna ask, do you think there's a way that we should hold people accountable for some of the things that they say? And they may not realize they're saying these things that could be hurtful because, as I mentioned, like this is unfortunately the society that we grew up in. How would you encourage somebody to kind of reach out to someone and say, like, what you said wasn't cool in a way that they don't feel offended, but understand that this is just a work to becoming like a better society?
Right. So just like you said, right? Stopping it at that moment, right? Just as we would if we see um uh, uh you know, someone stealing something, you know what I mean? Like it has to have some type of boundary where we're able to address the situation at the moment, so that we can inform and educate that person to know that it's incorrect. The behavior is not okay, and it's hurting someone else. And I think that, like you said, it may be something around our community or our culture that is happening specifically too, and seeing it as we're growing up and in cartoons, like you mentioned, and movies, and being something that is laughed at, right? It's like, oh, you put your foot in the way, right, so that I can trip, right? So that intent to just hurt someone and it being funny, those are things that we need to address.
Now, the pandemic exacerbated risk factors for domestic violence, leading to a spike in cases. I also think this could be a reason why Google decided to add this feature at this point. Have you noticed a similar pattern within your work at a DV center?
What we've noticed is that it was more difficult for folks to connect while being at home with the abusive partner, right? So generally, we had spaces where the person would come in for services. And during the pandemic, it turned out that we had to communicate either via text or via email, right, to ensure that our clients were still safe, to ensure that we were providing the service for counseling. So it's something that is very needed. And I think that being able to connect through text messaging, which is something very common, is it it's late, but at least it's here. You know what I mean? So it's like rolling through with the time, with the changes in time.
It's important to note that 1 in 4 women experience domestic violence. As your organization works predominantly with Latinas, can you explain how women of color are more vulnerable?
Again, as I mentioned before, it's the lack of resources or known resources available to our community, which is why we engage in doing community outreach, and traveling right throughout the 5 boroughs to connect with our community, and spreading the word about domestic violence and how you can teach your growing families or and your friends about the issue. That's it's prevalent, right, in within our communities.
So definitely resources is a huge reason why many of these women may be experiencing this. How
Mhm.
could a woman's background as a Latin woman, a Black woman, or even an immigrant person make battling or escaping domestic violence a much more difficult task?
Right. So we understand that it may be based on culture, where sometimes we don't air our dirty laundry, as we say. That may be the culture piece of it, but also being of immigrant, or being an immigrant, you may not have support available to you to escape, where we never suggest folks to just leave at the moment because that may be actually really dangerous for the survivor. However, having that support and the network to be able to um, complete or work on a safety plan, discuss a safety plan, which is like an ongoing um, document, basically, that which it could be verbal, it could be written out, but it's kind of like an ongoing plan for you to remain safe or have some type of safety net built out for you. But again, for immigrants, it may be the lack of support from friends or family, coming to this space on your own, not having anyone to rely on or anything like that can be a factor, as well as culture, because sometimes we try to hide things that we know are not acceptable for others.
Now, how could those in need utilize some of the resources your organization provides? And can you just tell us some of what those things are?
So, for example, we have an emergency shelter. We have a transitional housing program. We offer counseling services. Right now, the counseling services are remote, which would actually connect you to resources or immediate needs that you would be able to receive services on. Our emergency shelter also it operates 24/7, and our transitional housing program. Also is a way for you to um, reach out for services.
So we have less than a minute, but we definitely want to get to this. Can you just tell us
Mhm.
some of the red flags that people should look out for?
Sure. So one of the well, part of the whole situation in regards to DV is a power and control dynamic that happens with the abusive partner. It could be blaming. It could be accusatory. It could be you know physical abuse, right? It could be emotional abuse. You may not realize it, but even someone that aims to hit you with a pillow because they're angry. So any intent that the person has to harm you is always a red flag for domestic violence.
Janelle, thank you so much for joining me. If you look on the screen, you will see contact information for their organization. Please, if you know anybody who needs it, definitely feel free to reach out to them. But once again, thank you so much for joining me, and we'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.